and finish talking about the anatomy of the wall of the GI tract. And then what I'll do is I'm going to give you guys a little bit of time to go through and kind of look at some of the models. Specifically, I think what we're going to do today is focus on the digestive boards that you guys have on your benches. Really good guys. And just kind of look at some of the gross anatomy of the digestive system. And then what we'll do is we'll start kind of going through systematically some of the microscopic anatomy. If my morning lab is any indication, we're just barely going to get a start on it, and then we'll probably run out of time, which I'd imagine probably nobody's going to argue with if we go through all of it tonight. But we have time. I'm not stressed. We have all of next week as well to go over the digestive system. Okay, so let me pull up the board.
No, man. I didn't feel it.
I've been thinking a lot lately about body parts. If I had to get rid of a single body part, what would it be? I think I'd get rid of my spine. It's really been holding me back. You get it? Holding me back? Okay. Amelia never looks impressed with my jokes, so I always gotta check in. All right, so. See, it's really been holding me back. All right, let's go ahead and move on. I thought that was pretty funny myself. All right, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the layers of our digestive tract. So we had started this morning with the mucosa, right? That was our first layer of our GI tract.
I'd get rid of my ribs.
Okay, so remember we had our epithelial cells.
See that? That joke only works if I'm the guy.
Terribly uncommon.
Like, you know that conspiracy that Marilyn Manson. Yeah.
Remember
Because I
that
actually did that.
it
We didn't
lays
hear.
on a layer of connective tissue that we call the lamina propria. So we have that in there as well. All of this, of course, was on the board this morning when we left class. So we have that. And here's a couple of small blood vessels in the lamina propria, things like that. So it's blood vessels in here. Small blood vessels in here as well. And then remember as well that in that mucosa we do have that thin layer of smooth muscle called the muscularis mucosa as well, right? So we can add some smooth muscle cells in here. It's a pretty thin layer, at least compared to the rest of it. It's pretty thin. So we can add a little bit of smooth muscle in there, and that essentially kind of makes up our mucosa. So this morning in lecture, we said that we have three primary layers in every tube in our body, right? That inner layer of epithelial cells, which we just drew, with a few other things. And then we have our middle layer, at least in blood vessels, our middle layer of smooth muscle. And then we have our outer layer of connective tissue. The GI tract is, I guess, big enough that we actually are going to add a fourth layer in. And it's actually going to be right below the mucosa. It's called the submucosa. So look at that. It's named for you. So the next thing that we have is going to be the submucosa. So our first layer is the mucosa, and our second layer is the submucosa. The submucosa. So the submucosa is characterized by a lot of connective tissue, larger blood vessels. We're going to see pretty big blood vessels in the submucosa, supplying this guy with blood. So I'm going to put some blood vessels in here as well. These guys are going to be bigger, right? I'm going to put some big blood vessels in here, right? And then a lot of connective tissue, right? So I'm going to put some connective tissue fibers in here as well. We've got our connective tissue. the submucosa is we do see part of, and I mentioned this very briefly this morning, we see part of the nerve network that we find in the gut, okay, the digestive tract. Remember, I mentioned very briefly this morning that the digestive system, and specifically the gastrointestinal tract, has a fairly rich network of nerves such that it can act as its own integrating center under certain circumstances. So in the gut, there are two primary nerve networks, and one of them is in the submucosa. It's found right here, right close to the muscles that it controls, and it's called the submucosal plexus. So I'm going to put some neurons in here to sort of help us to visualize kind of where it would be. This is essentially what we have. And this is essentially what we have. Oh, you listen, we're just talking about it. But shh, don't tell them. Okay, so we have the submucosal plexus in there. So we'll add that to our list here. It's the submucosal plexus. Draw an arrow to those neurons right there. They're kind of hard to find under the microscope. We're not really going to be able to see them. You might get lucky and see like a pretty good neuron under the scope, but we're going to have kind of a hard time sort of seeing. So we're down up 2 layers now, right? We have our mucosa. Remember that mucosa includes everything here within the bracket. The epithelial cells, lamina propria, and that myant, or that muscularis mucosa, that layer of smooth muscle. This is more like the mucosa. And then below that, we have our submucosa, which is right here. That's basically number 2. Okay. After our submucosa, we get to our 3rd layer. Now we're back on track, right? So epithelial cells. Now we get to the muscular layer in the gut. We call that layer the muscularis externa. Call that layer the muscularis externa. What kind of muscle are we talking about? Smooth muscle, that's right. Okay. Remember, in blood vessels, we had smooth muscle. We called it the tunica media in our blood vessels. But it was arranged circularly, right? Those muscle fibers were wrapping around the tube, so that when they contracted, what the tube did is it got smaller, right? It led to vasoconstriction, and then when they relaxed, we have vasodilation, right? We have circular muscle fibers in the muscularis externa that do the exact same thing in the gut. When they contract, what they do is they make the gut get smaller. But we have a second layer of muscle as well that's arranged at a 90-degree angle. So if those circular muscle fibers are going around the tube, right, the tube like this, their second outer layer of muscle is arranged at a 90-degree angle like this. Okay? We call those longitudinal fibers. They run down the length of the tube. So if the circular muscle fibers make the tube get smaller in diameter, what would the longitudinal fibers do to the tube? They make it get shorter, right? They would make it get shorter as it contracts, right? So that combination of muscular actions of squeezing the tube with the circular muscle fibers and then causing the tube to get shorter with the longitudinal fibers is the action that we're able to move through our gut. Okay? It's called a peristaltic action. We call it peristalsis. And that's how we move through our gut. So we have an inner layer of circular muscle fibers, and then we have an outer layer of longitudinal. So So we'll put our circular muscle fibers in there first, right? Our muscle fibers are kind of like this. This is a pretty thick layer. We're going to put some muscle in there, right? So these muscle fibers, as I'm drawing them, are essentially running from left to right across the board, right? Because the other ones are arranged at a 90-degree angle, they're coming out of the board pattern, right? So what we have with our longitudinal fibers is we have a situation where we have these fibers that are coming out of the board at you. And as a result of that, they look just like little circles when we're looking at them from a different angle, right? So instead of coming left to right across the screen and looking at them like that, we're looking at them like this. So it's a little bit this sort of situation. So as far as our muscularis externa goes, we have an inner layer of circular muscle fibers, meaning that they go around the circle. We have an outer layer of longitudinal fibers. Longitudinal fibers. In the stomach, we actually add a third layer. The stomach is an incredibly muscular organ, and there's actually a third layer. It's called the oblique muscle layer. And a little bit later on today, we're going to look at those oblique muscle fibers in the stomach. So we're going to say here that in the stomach, there's a third one plus the oblique in the stomach. Finally, the other thing that we have in the muscularis and externa is we have the second major nerve network in the gastrointestinal tract. Kind of sandwiched between the circular and the longitudinal muscle fibers is the second network of neurons. So let's add some neurons in there. There are neurons that are running through here like this. Something along like that, and a sandwich in between there. That network of neurons is called the myenteric plexus. Myenteric meaning muscles, right? Myo, muscles. So we see that as well. Myenteric plexus. So again, two major nerve networks in the gastrointestinal tract. The first one is found right at the top of the submucosa. We call it the submucosal plexus. And then the one sandwiched between the two layers of smooth muscle are the myenteric plexus. Okay. We'll talk a little bit more about motility and how the smooth muscle and stuff like that works probably next week. But I want to kind of focus on the anatomy. Right? So this is our third layer. This is the muscularis externa right here. Okay, so this is number 3. It's our third layer that you see right there. And then finally, the last thing that we need to add in is we need to add in our layer of connective tissue that holds all of this together, right? So that's our very last layer. Now in blood vessels, we called it the serosa. We call it the adventitia. In the gut, we call it the serosa. So our fourth layer is the serosa. Add that in here. The serosa. That's connective tissue. Right? So go ahead here. thick. It's got a few connective tissue fibers in there just to keep the bottom from falling out of our dog. Right? Just like that. That is our servos. Not really a whole lot to say about the serosa. Connective tissue. I suppose the only thing really for us to kind of note about it is that I think by now we've seen enough internal organs. We know that the layer of connective tissue over the outside of an internal organ is what? What? The visceral layer, right, of a larger parietal membrane, and then there's an outer parietal layer as well, right? So that serosa is continuous with something that we call the peritoneum. Continuous with the peritoneum. And that peritoneum forms a fairly complex sheet of connective tissue within your abdominal cavity. You probably have, or maybe have heard of your mesenteries. These are sheets of connective tissue that hold your digestive organs in place. You know, when we take a look at our small intestine, especially, it looks like just a big, twisty, long tube, right? But the reality is that it's twisted in very specific ways. And if we went in and we changed the way that it's twisted, it could cause some real problems for us. And in fact, this happens fairly regularly with abdominal surgeries and things like that, right? So those mesenteries that form as part of that peritoneum cover this, and what they do is they hold these in place and they keep them folded the way that they're supposed to be folded, so you don't get like gut adhesions and blockages and things like that, which is definitely good. So it's definitely something for us to sort of consider as we start to take a look at this. So it's continuous with that peritoneum. So anyway, kind of a lot there. But the best way to think about this is kind of like a layer cake, right? You have all of this occurring in layers. And what we'll do is we'll take a look a little bit later on today. I'm going to give you guys some time right now to kind of get to know some of the gross anatomy before we dive into the microscopic anatomy. But what we'll do is we'll go through things like the stomach, and the small intestine, and the large intestine. And we'll take a look at how these layers vary depending upon the specific job that those things have, right? So for instance, the stomach has a very specific job that's different from that of the small intestine, right? And as a result, we're going to see that there are variations in the mucosa and as well in the muscularis externa between those two parts, right? So we're going to start to take sort of a comparative look at different parts of the GI tract, and we're going to look at their jobs, and we're also going to see how the anatomy of the two varies a little bit depending on the job. Kind of the goal for the next couple of days. We'll definitely not finish it today, but we'll get started. Any questions about the anatomy of the GI tract in general? Okay. We'll leave this on the board in case we can refer back to it. So we definitely are going to be doing that before we're finished. For now, what I think I'd like to do though is give you guys, I think one of the things that kind of continually works for us, I think, is spending time with models and stuff like that. So your lab, this is lab 17. You guys only have 2 labs left. 2 labs. Almost over. All right. So the lab 17 is on the digestive system. So part A is what we're going to focus on right now. There's a lot here. My morning lab seemed to want to know everything about every model, and it's way more than we can get through today, right? So just like, bear with me and trust me when I show you what models to spend time with right now. We'll get to all of them, I promise, but we can't do all of it right now. There's just way too much there. And there's a lot of structure-function relationships, so I really need to spend time talking about what things are and what they do before we can get into, the models and stuff like that. So just trust the process. I know that you're all antsy to get everything taken care of today, but trust the process. So this is, part A is the gross anatomy of the GI tract organs. This is what we're going to start with. Almost all of this can be done on those digestive boards that you guys have on your desks. So this is like the one model to rule them all, so to speak, because there's just a lot of information here on those boards. We are not going to probably get to any of the accessory organs today, but you'll notice that we have liver models out and stuff like that. I give you permission to ignore those models today. You don't even have to worry about them. There's a few other things as well, right? But we don't have to worry about all of those accessory organs today. We will get to those next week. The last part of our lab deals with histology, right? So this is the histology. I just kind of want to point this out, right? Because, we've had some units so far with a lot of histology, and there's been like 2 or 3 things that we need to identify. This is the histology for this unit right here. This is a lot of microscope, or for this part of this unit. There's still reproductive histology that we have to do. So there's quite a bit of microscope work. We're going to spend a lot of time, especially on Wednesday and Friday of next week, with microscope slides. We'll start today, but it's kind of like a soft start. But we will get through part of this today, but we'll finish the rest of it next week. You'll notice that the one thing that is missing from this lab is stuff for you to label, okay? So at this point, it's time to get into the models, right? But suffice it to say that the pancreas is necessary because it secretes digestive enzymes into the small intestine. So this is a little bit of the duodenum right here. Again, you can see those plicae circularis and stuff like that. And then the liver is also kind of simultaneously secreting its own stuff into the duodenum to help with digestion. You can see this kind of bleeding. So those ducts dump in a couple of places. This bile duct right here, you can kind of see right here, it actually empties into the small intestine right here. That's called the duodenal papilla right there. It's just an opening that we see. And then the other opening of the other duct is kind of right there. So there's 2, a major and a lesser pancreatic duct that we see dumping in here. And those little enlarged areas where they come out, like little nipples, are called duodenal papilla. Okay. What we don't see on this model is what's on your list. This model isn't really dissected, I guess, enough to show those things. But if we could somehow shave away additional tissue here, right? What we would see is that this duct kind of comes out like this, and it actually becomes enlarged right here, right? It actually becomes kind of enlarged right there, kind of like that. That's a terrible picture. Right? Yeah, that's still not great. But you see how I'm trying to draw it like it gets bigger right there? That, where it becomes bigger, when a tube becomes sort of enlarged, we sometimes call that an ampulla. And we'll see that next week on the fallopian tubes, on the uterine tubes in the female reproductive tract. There's a part of the fallopian tube called the ampulla, where it just becomes a little bit enlarged, right? So it becomes enlarged right there. And that enlarged area is called the hepatopancreatic ampulla, okay? So that's where that name on your guys' list comes from, is the hepatopancreatic ampulla. It's just that we can't really see it because this model isn't dissected enough, Fun fact about that one, though, we've mentioned a lot this semester that a lot of our anatomical structures have formal names as well, probably for the person who discovered it. Right? This one has been renamed for a very long time as the hepatopancreatic ampulla, but its original name was the ampulla of Vader. And I think that, as a Star Wars geek, that one's kind of fun, right? Because the ampulla of Vader. It's spelled V-A-T-E-R, but it's kind of fun. So there you go. Fun fact. Maybe you'll win a Trivial Pursuit game with that this weekend. I don't know. But nevertheless, the hepatopancreatic ampulla, or the ampulla of Vader, is right there. And then, of course, there's a sphincter muscle, a circular muscle right in here that can close off that duct. Those are called the hepatopancreatic sphincters. And again, we can't really see them on these models because they just aren't dissected enough. But that's essentially right. So hopefully that answers a couple of things about the list. I told you we'd come back to, but we just needed the time. All right. Are there any questions about that? All right. All right, so let's go ahead and what I think I'd like to do with the time that we have left is I'd like to take a little bit of a closer look at the stomach. Let me zoom out a little bit here and bust out this guy. So we have these models scattered about. These are cross sections of the stomach. We also have similar ones that are cross sections of the small intestine. We won't get to those until next week. They're really cool models, but they're also a bit of a hot mess. The stomach is a little bit more straightforward, so I want to spend just a little bit of time on that. We'll talk a little bit about this, and then we will do the thing with the microscope. Sorry, the thought went out of my head for a second. We'll look at it under the microscope. The really cool thing is that it looks just like this under the microscope. Okay. So let's go ahead and spend a few minutes talking about this. Remember that the anatomy of the gut is like everything that we see on this model is on the board. Everything that is on the board is going to be under the microscope. So it's going to appear pretty darn similar to what we see here. This is one of the nice parts about this class, is being able to look at models of these things and then looking at them under the microscope and being, hey, I recognize that. So the first thing that we see, let's orient ourselves a little bit. I can't even find one that's unlabeled. You guys are doing such a good job. So what we've got here is we've got a section of the stomach, but I want to put it into perspective for a minute. So I'm going to put this guy. And if you take a look here at our stomach, I'm not going to take off the labels. So they've got the rugae labeled correctly, by the way, so that's perfect. So on a grand scale, right, on a big scale, you see here that you can see the rugae pretty well. But let's go ahead and take a look. So right down here at the edge of our stomach where it's cut so that we can open it up, you see that you've got some rugae and a cross-section that are pretty good, right? We've got this one right here, and you've got the other one right there, right? So let's go ahead and take just a little section of one of those rugae, kind of like that, right? Okay. I know my box is really, really small, That's the best I can do. It's zoomed in as we can possibly get. So again, I'm going to draw my little box, right? Like that. So you see when I do that, that's actually too big. Okay. So you see when I do that, if I look at the section of the wall inside of the box, the edge of the stomach doesn't look curved, it looks pretty darn flat going across. Do you see that? So when we do that, that's what this is. Okay? So does that make sense? That's what this is right here. So, oh shoot. Anybody ever play Operation? Probably redraw the box, actually. There, okay, we're good, okay? So this is what that is, right? Okay, so we've got, it looks flat right here, but it's part of a much bigger fold, right? Which is the root. So just wanted to put it into perspective so that you guys kind of know what it is that. Okay, so with that said, now that we're zoomed in, let's take a look at this. So we're looking at a very, very small section of the wall of the stomach. The first thing that we should probably do is use our layer cake model and identify the different regions of the stomach. Okay, so let's go ahead and start right here. Okay, our mucosa involves all of this. And I know it's hard to see, but we'll look at it in just a minute. There's a little bit of smooth muscle right here. That little bit of smooth muscle is our muscularis mucosa. This layer kind of right in here, right? So our mucosa is like right here, right? This is our mucosa. Okay. Down below that, we get into a layer of connective tissue with really big blood vessels. Okay. This is going to be the submucosa that we see right here. This is the submucosa. And then the next layer is the muscularis externa. And remember, there's 3 layers of muscle within the muscularis externa. There's an oblique, circular, and a longitudinal. We'll take a look at those in just a second. But this is the muscularis externa that we see right here. And then finally, last but not least, that final layer of connective tissue is the cilia. So we have that as well. Right. So the mucosa, the submucosa, the muscularis externa. We'll look at all of these layers in just a couple of minutes, but I just wanted to give kind of a bird's eye view. Okay, so that said, let's go ahead and zoom in on the mucosa, and we'll take a look at what we have. So remember, the mucosa is made up of epithelial cells, a connective tissue membrane called the lamina propria, and then that muscularis mucosa. So again, here's those smooth muscle cells that are coming out of the screen at you. If we were to turn it, you'd see that they look a little bit more like smooth muscle, right? They're now running left to right across the screen. A couple running opposite. What you'll notice, though, about the mucosa, and we're going to see this theme throughout, is that, remember, this is a very small part of an individual fold called a rugate. You can see the image of that, right? But here, what we see is that in addition to that, we see that the epithelium is folded within that, right? You see how we have these folds in the epithelium right here? They're going like this. You all see that? Cool. Okay. So we have these folds in the epithelium right here. So we're folded even more than we can see with the naked eye. The folds that we see with our naked eye, those rugae are just the beginning of it. But then within that rugae, if we can zoom in, we see that the epithelium is folded even more, right? So what do we have here? We you take a look at those folds in the epithelium, you'll notice that the top parts of them are folded a little bit more loosely, a good term, right? Like from here down to about here, you notice those folds are pretty loose. But from there down, the folds get a lot tighter, right? The upper parts of these folds that are pretty loose are what we call the gastric pits. Okay? And then the lower parts where the folds get a lot tighter are called the gastric glands. Okay? They're called the gastric glands. So we have the gastric glands and we have the gastric pits. That name gland implies that something is going to be secreted from it. It is. There's actually a number of things there's. But what's happening here is that we've folded the epithelium, and then the lower parts of those folds, those gastric glands, the epithelial cells become super specialized, and they actually become secretory. And they secrete things into the lumen of this cell. The other thing that we see, we'll talk about the gastric glands and the cells that we see there in just a second. I'll write some things on the board. But the other thing that you see here is you see that you have all of your connective tissue in here. This is all lamina propria, right? We can see a little bit of lamina propria down here, but we also see it up there. Why is that? Well, we have to visualize all of this kind of three-dimensionally. Kind of going straight across, which is a nice visualization. We see that straight across is not always the right way. So what's going on? So imagine that this pipe cleaner, you see right here, this is my line of epithelial cells. But epithelial cells don't just float in space, they have to rest on something, right? So this is my lamina propria that we have right here, right? So epithelial cells are in orange, lamina propria is in purple, they're resting on top of each other. And then what happens is we see that the epithelium folds. So you see that the epithelium folds, and we get something that looks like that. So you see how the lamina propria folds up with right? So that's what we're looking at, right? So the lamina propria folds up with epithelium. So that's why when you look at this model, you see that we have lamina propria up here, but we also have it down here as well, where we would expect to find it, right? Is that cool? Good with that? Okay, so let's go ahead and take some notes here on some of the things that we have here. You'll notice there are multiple cells then in the gastric glands. Let's go ahead and start with the yellow ones that we see right here. In the gastric glands, there are several types of cells. The first one we see are the ones I circled in yellow. Those are called enteroendocrine cells. They're called enteroendocrine cells, right? So part of that word obese you recognize from earlier in the semester, right? Endocrine, yeah, it's the endocrine cells, right? So we talked about a lot of endocrine glands earlier in the semester, right? These are ones that we did not talk about, but the enteroendocrine cells do secrete hormones. Okay? We're not going to go into them in a whole lot of detail, but one of the things that I mentioned this morning in lecture is that we really have to regulate what we call motility of the gut, and how fast you send food through the gut, right? If you send it through fast, it's not good. If you send it through too slow, it's not good. These enteroendocrine cells secrete hormones that essentially essentially talk to other gut cells and help you to regulate how fast you move things through your gut. They're also partially responsible for a feeling of fullness after we eat a meal, and stuff like that as well. We'll talk a little bit more about this. These are the enteroendocrine cells. The other cells that we see in here are the lighter colored purple ones. You'll notice in this gastric gland, kind of the upper part of the gland, those cells, those are kind of a lighter purple, and then down here in the lower part of the gland, they become a much darker purple, right? The lighter colored purple cells at the top of the gland are called parietal cells. Okay. And the darker colored ones towards the bottom of the gland are called chief cells. Okay, so we have parietal cells and we have chief cells. Parietal cells are responsible for secreting probably what we know the stomach for. They're responsible for secreting hydrochloric acid. So we have hydrochloric acid that's being secreted by parietal cells. We'll talk a little bit more about the job that hydrochloric acid has next week, but suffice it to say for now that the parietal cells secrete it. They also secrete an enzyme called gastric lipase. Our parietal cells secrete this enzyme called gastric lipase. Gastric means stomach, right? What is lipase? What do you think that enzyme dissolves? What major group of macromolecules? Lipids, right? Yeah, it's going to play a role in lipid breakdown. Okay? So hydrochloric acid and gastric lipase are both secreted by parietal cells. Chi cells are responsible for secreting another enzyme called pepsin. And I hate to break it to you, but some of our digestive enzymes break a rule that you've learned about enzymes. How have you always learned that we name enzymes? At the ending ASE, right? Turns out not every enzyme has that ending ASE. And pepsin is one enzyme, but it does not have that ending ASE. But pepsin tells us a little bit about the job that the enzyme has. What does that word sound like? Which of our major words and macromolecules would you put pepsin? Protein. Yeah, right? Because the bonds that bind amino acids together are called peptide bonds, right? Peptide bonds hold amino acids together. Pepsin is going to work to help to break peptide bonds. Again, we'll talk a little more about that next week. Finally, chief cells secrete another chemical called intrinsic factor. Which is a molecule that is responsible for vitamin B12 absorption. It's kind of a weird one. It doesn't really do anything in the stomach. But later on in the large intestine, when it comes time to absorb vitamin B12, we can't do it unless intrinsic factor is present. It's just necessary for the absorption of vitamin B12. So this is what we have, right? This is the group of cells that we have here in these gastric glands, these lower parts of these. So in a couple of minutes, we're going to take a look at the stomach under the microscope, and we're going to see that the parietal cells above the chief cells, and they're like super obvious. It's pretty cool. Like I said, this model doesn't lie to us. Okay. Let's work our way down just a little bit though on our model. So moving down, we have our muscularis mucosa right here. We have our submucosa right here, again with big blood vessels. And then we get to the muscularis externa. We get to our muscularis externa right here. Remember, in the stomach, there are three layers. We have the oblique, we have the circular, and the longitudinal. It's a little bit easier to sort of visualize those if we look at this model from the top. If we do this from the top, zoom in a little bit. muscularis externa is kind of right here. And what it's doing is it's taking us stepwise, right? So it's like we're looking at a set of steps. So the circular muscle fibers are the ones that are right here. They're running in this direction like this. And then below them, you can see the longitudinal muscle fibers running in this direction. And we can see that those are indeed at 90-degree angles to each other. Okay? The oblique muscle fibers that you see up here are running at an angle to the other two and are hence oblique, right? Like our oblique muscles in our abdomen are not at a right angle to our rectus abdominis and our transverse abdominis. So we see that they are angles. So that's how they get the name the oblique muscle. The other thing that you can see here in this view is you see that sandwiched between the circular and the longitudinal muscles, you have this kind of spider web looking thing. That's going to be that myenteric plexus we talked about a little bit ago. That's that nerve network that we find in the muscle. This model shows it pretty well, right? Cool, right? 3 layers, pretty easy to see. Okay. The problem, if it's a problem, the problem arises when we look at it from a different angle. So here, you look at this and you're like, oh yeah, I see 3 layers. Here's your muscularis externa. How many different layers do you see? Pretty much 2, right? Like this one and this one are pretty obvious from each other. But then the oblique, man, it sure looks pretty similar to the circular, right? So we're not like gonna get our feelings too hurt if we're having difficulty. We had pretty good luck this morning identifying 3 layers. If we look at it from this angle, it gets a little bit easier to see the difference, right? Oblique, circular, longitude. It really depends on the section and how good it is. But we had pretty good luck this morning. My slide is pretty good, so when we get to that point, we'll definitely use it as a reference for the slides. Okay. Any questions about the stomach cross section? Okay. So, just a second. I'm going to ask you guys to go get a slide from the back of the room. The slide that I'm going to ask you to get is the digestive composite slide. Okay. So, just real quick, it's the one that's serosa right here. One of the things that we found this morning looking at these slides is that the serosa is not always super visible. I think sometimes it gets stripped off of these stomachs when they make these slides. So if you see serosa, awesome. If you don't, I wouldn't get too worried about it. It's there. It just got stripped off. So before we dive into any one of these layers, let's take a minute and let's identify the 4 basic layers of the stomach. The mucosa, the submucosa, the muscularis externa, and the serosa.
It's me. Nathaniel. Could be. Could be. Identify those 4 layers, right? Mucosa, submucosa,
muscularis externa, musculosa. Good. I trust your judgment. I trust you guys at this point in the semester. Remember that mucosa is heavily, heavily folded, right? So it's going to look really dense. All right, let's go ahead and zoom in on the mucosa, and then we'll go from there. So I'm going to clear my marks, and I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit. I do have a little bit, I have an extra lens that you get than you guys do, so it's easier for me to zoom in on certain areas. But I'm going to zoom in on my mucosa right here. So we're going to go one more time. There we go. So I can fit this particular lens, I can fit the entire mucosa into one view. So we're looking at this heavily folded epithelial here. We've got a little bit of connective tissue right here. That's that lamina propria. You'll notice you've got some small blood vessels in there and stuff. And then you have your smooth muscle right here. That's that muscularis mucosa that we have right there, right? So going from here all the way out to here is our mucosa, right? So all of it's there, just like in our layer cake that we drew over here, going from one to the next to the next. Okay. So get into your mucosa. Let's identify the parts of our mucosa. Let's identify the epithelial cells themselves. Let's identify the lamina propria. And then let's identify the muscularis mucosa. You'll also, I'm going to add one thing to your list here, just to kind of move us along. You'll notice that on the epithelial layer, you'll notice that right about here, draw a dotted line here. Right about there, look at this. It's not folded as heavily up here, and then the folds get much tighter as we go. These are the gastric pits that we're looking at right here, and then the gastric glands extend beyond those, right? So if we were moving that over here, look like that, right? These gastric pits are right here, and then the gastric glands extend. And then I've got my lamina propria, and then I've got my muscularis mucosa. This line doesn't match up, sorry about that. Okay, so we've got that. So your gastric pits are here, and then your glands get deeper and then extend beyond. You know what the last part of you dies is? You die, you know what the last part of you dies is? Dies? Yeah, you die later.
Oh.
I thought you knew the joke. I don't think so. I think you just die all at once. Yeah. I thought you knew the joke for a minute though. I was It's like, sweet. All right, let's identify the major parts of our mucosa here. Then we'll zoom in and we'll look at the individual cells of our mucosa. Which is what gives them a darker color when we stain them. But those are your chief cells, right? So the ones like that we see over here, these are our parietal cells. I'll put a P over here. And then the ones that we see down here, those are our chief cells. And I'll put So we can't really differentiate the enteroendocrine cells under the microscope, so don't worry about those under the scope. On the model, for sure, they're easy to see, but on the scope, they're tough. But we can definitely tell the difference between the parietal cells and the chief cells. Let's take a minute to do that. Yes.
These dark ones right down here, sheep cells.
Perfect.
Anything else I need to be able to go with?
No, I mean, you got good gastric hits. Those are gastric hits, but they're easy to see.
I'm curious about this little part right here. What is this?
That's a great question. I don't know.
It kind of stood out to me, so.
It is weird. I've never seen that before. Yeah, I don't know. It's strange. I don't know. Could be an inclusion, like it's a dust that goes in the cell and it like stained or something. I don't know. Isn't it cool to see the cells under the microscope? Huh? That's in it, yeah. That is in it.
That was really cute. That's so neat.
And in me.
Mm-hmm.
All right. How we doing? Are we doing all right? These are super quiet. All right. How we doing? I feel like you guys are toast this afternoon. Is that the general gist that I get?
We please have the lab exam.
What?
I'm gonna throw up if I don't have my lab
I'll
exam.
get your lab exam today. Don't worry.
Ah.
It's just I'm gonna hand it back and you guys are gonna leave.
That's the only thing on my mind. That's
I
the
know,
only
I
thing.
can tell. Yeah, you're like, I'm out. As soon as this gets over with, I'm out. I'll hand it back and just, we're almost done. The slide isn't not much longer. All right. Okay. Any questions about chief cells and parietal cells? Dance. That's all I got. I don't know. Okay. If there's no questions, we'll move on. Fuck you. Let's go. I know what you're thinking. I'm not gonna sugarcoat things. All right, submucosa, big blood vessels, big artery, big vein. Pretty easy. There's not a lot to say about the submucosa. If we have patients, which we obviously don't, we could look kind of right here at the top of the submucosa, right near that muscularis mucosa, you probably would be able to find neurons up there as part of the submucosal plexus. But man, they're hard to find. And it's harder to be sure that it actually is one too. So we aren't too worried about it. But they would definitely be up there, right kind of at that border between the muscularis mucosa and the submucosa. Right? So we have them up there. But other than that, there's not a whole lot to say about the submucosa. Again, big blood vessels. I mean, look at the size of this vein. You can actually see it's just jam-packed full of red blood cells and stuff like that. Okay? The next thing that we need to do is we need to go out to the muscularis externa. You might have to look around a little bit on your slide to try to find an area where you can see all three layers. On this slide you can. I'm going to actually go right down here. And if I go down here far enough, I get into an area where I can actually see all three of my layers. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I won't be able to fit the whole thing in my field of view. But if I zoom in enough, it's a little tight. It's a little tight, but we can make it work. So here, I can see all three of my layers, right? So right here, I see smooth muscle, and those fibers appear to be running kind of sort of up and down in my screen. And then I get to this little breaking point right here, and they change direction. Now they're coming out of the screen at me, and all I see are the little pinprick nuclei of them. And then when I get over here to the far left, you'll notice how they appear to change direction again a third time, right? So because my mucosa is that way, right, that makes this my oblique layer, that makes this my circular layer, and that makes this one my longitudinal layer. You might have to look around a little bit on your slide, but that's essentially what we're looking for there. Is we're looking for those three layers. We're looking for oblique, circular, and longitudinal. And like I said this morning, people have apparently a lot of finding all three of them. You just might have to look around a little bit on your slice of stomach to be able to find it. I'll let you guys look for 2 seconds. I will go get lab exams.
I think you will.
It's hard though. It's like very squish. Yeah, they're all just like what am I listening to?
I don't know. Scored? That's their name.
I think it sounds like one of those TikTok edits.
Can I play a song? Look your face. Look your face. Okay. Hey, you can't do this. Will.
Stop.
My
Don't talk to me.
second Chem midterm, the average grade 6.
There's a video my friends recorded.
I'm not done.
Like for a night, we went to like this like thing. My friend just got obsessed with trying to do it. There's a video. I want to watch it. It's so
Oh, this is easy.
He's no bitches.
Why are you friends with like a 25-year-old dude?
He's younger than me.
Is that the tall one? No.
A tall one. He looks.
I think that one's 2 years. He's younger than me.
Most smart people
I'm not the oldest
I
one.
don't know though. People have been saying I was 23, and I can't stop. I can't stop thinking about it. I think it's when I have
It's
black
my
hair.
favorite picture of my tall friend. I find it so funny.
Yes. Why do they all look? You should have maybe a baby face.
It's so funny because he's in the background of the picture. It looks like you're about to go for someone. Let's check it.
Also, it looks like he's a teacher.
And then he's wearing, that's like his headband, but he's wearing one of these